Welcome to the Top Order podcast. Been a little while since we've all been in the same room, but we are here for this week in cricket. There's quite a lot that's gone on in the past couple of weeks in cricket, which we'll endeavour to cover on the show. We'll talk a little bit of England, Sri Lanka. Is Joe Root England's greatest of all time, aka GOAT? Gus Atkinson, is he an all-rounder? We'll talk a little bit of Kamindu Mendis, a New Zealander, as the all-format coach for the ECB until 2027. A debut for a 6'7" seamer who's taken 2 first-class wickets. We'll also cover a little bit of New Zealand versus Afghanistan prep as well. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned.
Well, that's right. I got to do that, and then you can talk again.
Okay, very good. Well, boys, we are in the same room. It's been a little while since we've all got together and talked some This Week in Cricket. There's been, I guess, if you're a neutral, a couple of pretty lacklustre test matches over the course of the last few weeks. England versus Sri Lanka. Talk out of the England camp, they've been tested at times and have had to really dig deep. But if we kind of look at the results, it's been pretty easy, I think you would suggest, for England in these first two. And the third game kicked off last night, so we are recording this after day one. England, I think, about 220 odd for 3. Ollie Pope, proving some critics wrong with a runnable.
Every time he needs to, right? Every time he needs to, he reminds me sort of very different, but reminds me back in the 90s. It used to be Craig McMillan and Chris Cairns were the two. Like they'd go on this lean run of form, and then as soon as the critics would get, the noise would get very, very high, they'd go out and score an 80 or a 90 or 100 or something, and then that noise would dim down for a little while, and then 10, 15 innings later, it's back on. And Ollie Pope seems to be doing the same thing.
Yeah, and look, we'll talk a little bit about that later on. We'll also talk a little bit about bad light, and I guess I don't know whether you guys saw as well some criticism from the MCC for not opening the gates for that fourth day. Ticket prices, a half-empty ground at Lord's. So lots going on that we can level at the administrators, which we like to do from time to time. Lip, I might hand over to you because you've got a more detailed run sheet. Where do you want to start tonight?
I don't know. I mean, why don't you guys start with the light, because it's the most current, thing that's just happened, and then we can kind of dive back into some of the things, I suppose, from those first 2 tests. Because as you said, we're in the middle of Test 3, so we won't really talk about it in great detail. But why don't you cover the light? Because I didn't actually see last night's play. I woke up this morning, saw, clicked on the Crick Info link, and it was 220 for 3, and saw, the news about Pope, but off a disrupted rain affected day. So I didn't even think anything of it. But the two, you two over there, Baldy and Binksy, turned up and said, "Oh, we got to talk about the bad light." So what's the situation?
Yeah, look, let me give a little bit of context before we come on to the light. So I think that there is some criticism, I think, around, the paying public in the UK at the moment, particularly. So Lord's going into the fourth day. And I think the caveat here is most grounds will sell tickets for the first 4 days. And then quite often you don't get great advance sales for a fifth day. Yeah. And you're not going to get great advanced sales for a fifth day in this Bazball era, because England are playing, quick cricket, aren't they? So they want to finish the game. But at Lord's, there was probably 7,000 or 8,000 people in. Tickets were started at £95 for that fourth day, which is, a lot of money. But, in context, it's pretty similar to, a decent seat at the Emirates Stadium to see Arsenal. It's pretty similar to a seat at Wimbledon to watch some tennis in London. And it's pretty similar to a seat at the Oval to watch a day's Test cricket as well. And obviously, if they let people in for, a bargain price, they've then got to refund the people that have paid the advertised price as well. Okay. So there's a lot to unpick. But then pretty hot on the heels of that, only, I think, 44 overs or something like that bowled yesterday. And I think probably the narrative is they've got floodlights on, they've got a crowd in, and they're saying, even with the lights on, we can't play cricket. And I don't think it's just this game. I think it's something that potentially needs to be addressed around the world. And particularly, I guess, in the context of New Zealand, obviously going off on a subcontinent tour where you start pretty early in the mornings because it literally goes dark at the snap of your fingers at 5 o'clock or whatever. But if the ground is equipped with floodlights, I guess the question is, why can't we continue to play? And why can't we find a solution that gives the paying fans, whether they're in the ground or subscribing to, Fox or Sky or whatever you want to suggest, being able to see an entertainment product. So that's, I think, where this has all come from. It was pretty gloomy. And I think probably the change of rules in the last several years, which has been, used to be batters, do you want to go off? Yes, we do, or no, we don't, depending on the game situation. Now it's very much umpires saying that it's now too dark. We take a light reading and off we go.
But don't they just turn the lights on, Baldy? Isn't like, have I missed that? Because they do turn the lights on sometimes, don't they? And keep going.
Yeah, well, yes, they do. But the challenge at the moment is that the umpires take a light reading, and once the umpires decide to go off, you cannot come back onto the field until the light reading improves from whatever it was when you left the field. So artificial floodlights may not help in that situation by improving the light beyond what it was. So if the floodlights are on and they're doing their thing and the umpires still deem it to be too gloomy to continue, the only solution to that is the floodlights get floodlight here or the sun comes out. And those two things not happening, then that ruins the day for the rest of the fans. Fortunately, I've spent a lot of time in the dark room this week, in the room full of mirrors, and I have a solution. And I think in order to solve this problem for the paying fan who forked out £85, finest British pound pence, to go to the game, we just don't need to look any further than across the channel. And the terrific event that was put on sort of last month or the month before in Paris, and it's still going on now, and decide that as soon as light stops play in a game of cricket, all of the squads, both squads, assemble on the ground for an impromptu mini Olympics. And who wouldn't want to see, if you were a paying fan, two sets of, 35-year-old to 25-year-old super athletes doing a 4x400 meters relay around the boundary line, getting one player versus one player to run from the side screen to the middle wicket, touch a bail, and then bring it back and touch the side screen again. I mean, these events could put on at least 80 to 90 pounds worth of entertainment inside an hour for a paying fan. And, if it comes down to each one of those events being worth, say, 20 or 30 runs to the team total for the winner, look, forward-looking selectors would be looking at bigger blokes potentially to include at least one of them in the squad, just in case an Ashes series comes down to a discus event on a gloomy day. Don't tell me Mark Cosgrove couldn't still be playing international cricket if his job was to just come in and win the shot put.
He's done this all with a straight face.
Are we on candid camera? Is Billy Birmingham here and you're auditioning for the 12th man
just
reprise?
saying, I've spent a lot of time in the room of mirrors this week.
Have you put together any markets? Any markets? We'll come back to that. You think about that. I want to know who's going to win the high jump.
Mark Richardson versus Darren Lehman. We've already done this.
We've seen it.
Who doesn't want to see more of that?
Yeah,
I'm telling you, are you not entertained?
Is this not why is this such a big issue? I know you've talked about it from the customer's point of view, the fans' point of view, but at the end of the day, it's the nature of our sport. So you're saying where does it stop? If it rains, do we need to put a tarp over so that we can continue playing? Like, it's just the nature of our sport. We are governed by the conditions that we play in.
Yeah, I think there's probably 2 points. So I don't necessarily disagree with having that opinion, although I disagree with the opinion. I think we've got to look at it from a fan experience perspective. We're trying to make the game, the rhetoric is we're trying to make the game accessible. There's not enough communication around what's happening. And I think the confusing factor for me is that the umpires are in charge of this reading. It isn't the same reading at every single ground.
What? Why not?
So they take a reading when they deem the light to be, and Baldy can back me up or contradict me on this from an umpiring perspective. My understanding is the umpires deem when they think it's too gloomy to play cricket. They then take a light meter reading of whatever, I'm guessing lumens, and that then sets the precedent for the rest of that game at that location in that particular time. But then you go down the road to a ground maybe 50 miles away, or in this case in the UK maybe 20 miles away, and it could be a completely different set of readings.
Oh, right.
And then I think that the secondary component of this is you've got floodlights and you have got the ability to play day-night cricket with a pink cricket ball. So I think there's a solution there, not an ideal solution, because there'll be arguments around rub of the green and the ball doing a little bit more under lights, or, like we've seen in the course of the Ashes and we've seen this summer as well, a box of replacement balls coming out and all of a sudden the new one starts to swing round corners. But the reality is that's happened with a red cricket ball. What difference does it make whether it's red or pink? And I think if you ultimately gave the batting side potentially the choice and said, right, we are carrying on because we've got a reading here that's set by the ICC and hopefully set by someone with some credentials in, optometry or whatever, to say this is when it's safe to play. As a batting side, your choice is you can carry on playing with the floodlights and the red ball, or if you're struggling to see it, we will go and get a box of pink balls, and there'll be a box of 6 that are between each 10 overs. So, a box that says 40 to 50, and maybe the batting team get to pick out whichever one's in that box that they would like to bat against. And off you go, you carry on. And when the light improves to the reading for the red ball, then you are potentially going to then have to swap a red ball in. So, yes, there's some administration and some logistics around it, but I think you'd feel pretty gypped yesterday that based on I think this might be ICC regulations on what constitutes a day's play. The people that have seen 44 overs at the Oval yesterday don't get any money back, even though they've seen just under half what they would have been entitled to see. So, cost per minute or cost per over or whatever, they've,
it's £2 an over.
They've been gypped.
But very rarely are you going to be able to cater to the safety standards and the entertainment value. And I feel like the ICC or whoever has made these rules for Test cricket has chosen the player safety, going, we're going to take it out of it. Because, to be honest, 10, 20 years ago when it was the batting team able to choose whether they would keep going, England would have kept going in this situation, right? If we take the commercial side out of it, the gameplay side of it, Bazball, they would have kept going. They were on an absolute roll. They would have scored 500 in the day, the way they were going.
Yeah, England were on top in this game, really. I mean, what were they doing, 5 and over again?
Yeah,
220. Exactly 5 and over. So, yeah, why wouldn't they want to continue playing in those situations?
Didn't seem like the light was that bad, is it?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
That's the kind of point, right? Yeah. Ollie Pope certainly thought so. Should we talk about the cricket that's gone on in this series? Because it hasn't just been this test match at the Oval that we've got to talk about. Well, there's 2 previous test matches where, things went pretty much the same way for England throughout this series. What do we want to cover from the previous test matches? Do we want to talk about some of the England performances, or should we start with Sri Lanka? Because there's not as much to talk about there. There's a couple of highlights.
Go for it. Who do you want to talk about for Sri Lanka?
Well, I think the not the elephant in the room, but the shining light for Sri Lanka, I think so far has been Kamindu Mendis, right? Would we all agree?
Fernando's been good too.
Yeah. There's a couple of others, but let's talk about Mendis, because we have lamented Sri Lanka's ability to score runs on this podcast pretty frequently, like loudly and frequently over the last sort of 24 months, particularly in the middle order. And so what Sri Lanka have done, which is, I think, pretty innovative, is taken a top order T20 player, stick him in at number 7, give him absolute freedom to go as hard as he likes, and it seems to be paying off for him so far.
Called Bazball.
Well,
the thing that I've liked about him is not even necessarily like, you say yes, they've put an aggressive player, and he's if the ball's there, he tries to hit it. But I think that what I've liked is that he's so still. When he hits he's just so still at the crease is the thing that I've noticed the most. And so he looks like a test cricketer because of the way he's playing. Yes, maybe more aggressive in little bits and ways, but yeah, it's not like he's going out there and trying to blast his way 2 runs and it's coming off. He looks like someone who this is actually sustainable. He's not the Sri Lankan Bradman and he's going to keep an average of 90. That probably isn't sustainable. But he looks like someone who's going to get some runs for a little while now.
He's averaging 63 at first class level, 1600s already, and 2250s at the age of 25.
He's a good player. He's a terrific player. And
26 almost.
As much as we've lamented the inability for Sri Lanka to produce run scorers over the last, pretty much since Joe Wardener and Sangakkara have retired, this guy has been able to come through and give them a bit of punch in that middle order. So it's great. Good.
Very good.
Anything else that they've done well? You mentioned one of the Fernandos, Raj?
Yes. Took 8 for in the last match, I think. 8 for 100 odd across the 2 innings. He was good. I didn't see a lot of that match. I've saw a lot of highlights of that match. I didn't see anything. I don't know if anyone's been able to catch any live stuff, but
Difficult in this part of the world.
very difficult. But no, he looked like he bowled very well.
Yeah.
New ball.
Yeah, look, I think I've been impressed by him and by Kamara as well at times. Has looked as if he can exploit the English conditions to an extent, and they have been on offer. But I think the thing for me is they won the toss at Lords and had a bowl, stuck in England in on an absolute, sunlit, cloudless, pretty decent batting track, which was pretty poor, I think, as a decision, similar to a Nasser Hussain Brisbane toss decision of old. But it was the intent that they had. They just kind of, when you do that, you've got to go out and then buzz around like your life depends on it for the first 10 overs. And I think they almost went out there and went, no, man, we've made a really big error here. And then just, it was dross early doors. I think, slightly, and then slightly more disappointing yesterday. And I have been able to watch a little bit of it. So the ICC TV app has been pretty good. You get in the UK Sky feed, you can watch it live. So they were really disappointing yesterday. Again, just for me, body language intense. And you can say they're 2-0 down. There's not a lot to play for, but there's a test match and there's your individual performance. And again, I just felt, Baldy referenced it earlier on, they've let England score at 5 and over, and there's no shame in that. But I think it's the way in which they've let England score at 5 and over, which will be disappointing for them.
And they stuck England in again, so they clearly didn't learn. They clearly didn't learn their lesson from.
Although it was, it was dark as we talked about.
It was hard to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to bowl the side out at night. But
it was really, really hard to see for Ben Duckett striking at, I think, a million, and Ollie Pope at about 100.
Yeah. Well, they did get Joe Root out, which is proving very difficult to do lately.
Out of the middle of the bat on the boundary.
Yeah, well, look, they got him out. Look, there's no room. Well, there is room in this podcast for the story, but at least they got him out for something under 100, which they haven't been able to do much in this series.
I think that's the story that we go to next, because it's making me nervous criticising Sri Lanka too much, because New Zealand's about to go there for 2 tests, and I don't want too much egg on my face, because I'm very worried about this next 2 months for New Zealand, which we might get to later in the pod. But let's have the Joe Root conversation, because he's been amazing in the series, hasn't he?
Yeah, I want to go to Baldy first and get the kind of the stats take. Because we I think, or certainly Raj and I, probably fonder on the eye test when it comes to batters. But Baldy, I'm not saying you're not fond on the eye test, but definitely I think you've had a look at the numbers. I think I've seen a number of different comparisons do the rounds on social media. One that has stuck out for me is his record versus Kohli, and then the other one has been the amount of hundreds he scored in the last I think 2 or 3 years. He's gone from a really poor conversion rate. I mean, shit,
the numbers I've got them
I'd
here.
love a really poor conversion rate and already have 17 Test hundreds and then start to convert at a better rate. That would be brilliant.
Since the start of 2021, he had 1700s and 49 50s. Since then, he's scored 1700s and 15 50s. So he's just totally, I think probably when we started the Hall of Fame, I think it's about that time. And we sat there and went, geez, Root, this is the big criticism on Joe Root. And since that moment, he's flipped it around and he's getting more hundreds than 50s.
And the conversion rate of 50-50 for hundreds to 50s, if you can score 100 for every time you get 50, is world class. That's Viv Richards territory. That's proper cricketers are able to do that. Let's compare that to the other guys in the Big Four over the last 5 years. So if we talk about from the start of 2020 or September 2020 through to 2024, Kane Williamson has 1100s, albeit only in 20 matches. Joe Root's played 49 matches over that 5-year period. Kane Williamson's played 20, scored 1100s, only 250s for Kane. So his conversion rate also pretty good. If we go right down the list here, you got to go fair way down. Smith has 600s, 1250s, and an average of 44 over the last 5 years. Joe Root's average is 56, Kane's average is 70, and then away down here somewhere, I'll find Coley. Here he is right down at the bottom of my list here. 200s, 850s, and an average of 35. So over the last 5 years, Joe Root has clearly been, from a run-scoring perspective, a volume perspective, the best of the big four. Kane Williamson, obviously, averaging 70 on a more limited sample sizes, is right there from an average point of view. But, you know, as a player, he's now being talked about as England's greatest ever batter, potentially England's greatest ever player. How does that sit with you, Adam, prior to retirement?
Well, number one, I think he said he's not thinking about retirement, and that's a really good thing for me. I think purely in terms of stats, he'll catch Sachin if his hunger continues. And then you can argue around longevity and how many test matches and but I think he will end up as at the top of that tree. And I wonder then whether that gets caught with the way
test run score ever.
The way that test cricket is going. I think the thing for me as well, and look, this isn't a criticism of Coley and Smith and others that we've talked about, but even with that amount of test matches played since 2020, and that's really COVID. Let's be honest, Australia didn't want to go anywhere or do anything. So, and that's not Steve Smith's fault. England played in some, okay, they're playing international sport. They're in a 5-star hotel. They're very well looked after. I'm not saying that they were, frontline hospital workers, but from a cricketing perspective, he did it really tough. For a couple of years, he was captain. They were shit, and they were in those COVID protocols and bubbles for 2 years of that. And his own personal form didn't dip during that. His own personal form was fantastic, even though when you saw him at every single press conference, he looked like he'd had the life drained out of him. Yeah. So look, I just think the resilience that he's shown. For me, he is the greatest batter that we've got. He's covered off Kevin Peterson now, in my view. The one thing I'd probably say is he doesn't have a great record in Australia, but he has a decent record against Australia combined. I think he averages about 40, so it's less than his, obviously less than his career stat. He'll want to rectify that, obviously, on this Ashes tour. But yeah, just the weight of runs and the tempo that he bats at. And to be honest, I think you've also got to throw into the mix how good a bloke he seems. There isn't anybody who says a bad word about him. I don't think you can say the same about Kevin Peterson. So for me, all that means that, he at the moment, in my view, certainly since I've started watching cricket, he's the greatest English player. And I know people will disagree, including maybe the persons on my left.
No, I just, didn't he piss off David Warner or something at some point there? Anyway, just backing up
that'd be easy to do though, wouldn't it?
The numbers thing. I think we did. We looked at this a while back when England went to India at some stage, and we looked at the active batsmen, and Baldy throughout the whole Test Hall of Fame talked about average against replacement player value. His average is daylights ahead of anyone sort of around him at the moment that's been there for a long period of time. And the fact that he has gone everywhere in the world and he has just scored runs, and he averages close to 50 or over 50 in most of the places around the world. The one sort of blemish there being Australia, where he is struggling a little bit, but he could rectify that on the tour that's about to go ahead. But his stats are actually really consistent globally. It's not like he's gone and beaten up on one team. He has really applied it to everybody in the cricketing world.
And he's getting better. Like, that's the thing. Like, we have seen Smith regress over the last 5 years. We've seen Coley regress in terms of production and number of runs and hundreds and test match level.
Certainly test level, yeah.
He has regressed. Williamson has been productive, but has been beset by injury and lack of test matches to play in that period of time. So he hasn't been as productive as Joe Root. But Joe Root, I think 5 years ago, was fourth. If you ranked those four players, he was fourth in probably most people's power rankings. He's first now in terms of, from my point of view, because he's worn all of that responsibility of playing for England and captaining England just as Kane has done. And he has elevated himself from that number 4 position right up to the tippity top of the tree at the moment. As far as guys batting right now, I think he's the best of the 4 at the moment.
It's funny. I thought that this would be more when I posed the question mainly to myself, I thought that it would be one that we would have to debate. But, then I went through England's batters, and I mean, certainly in the modern era, Cook, Peterson, Gower, all of those kind of players, their average just it's 5 runs lower than Root, and obviously the hundreds and the weight of runs isn't quite there as well. And then it's just so hard for us, right, to think about all of the other players that are in the mix, like Hobbs and Hammond and Hutton and Barrington. Like, I mean, realistically, we just can't compare those guys. We try, we did our best in the Hall of Fame, but yeah, I think if you sort of exclude those and just think, okay, it's the modern player, he's really put himself beyond. And your point, Binksy, that he does look like he's got so much joy at the moment, having a great time playing in this environment, having that weight lifted off his shoulders, not being the captain, the style of cricket that they're playing. He looks like he could keep going like this for a good few years yet.
Yeah. And look, I guess that segues nicely to some England news that's come out in the last week or so, which is I got a text from you, Stu, when this happened. Brendon McCullum has signed on for what is essentially an extension of about 18 months. I think the press have been saying 2 years, but the reality was I think his contract went up until the end of the Ashes, I think, initially. It's been extended now by, I think, 18 months to cover another home Ashes and then a World Cup. But he's looking after the white ball and the red ball team. I think if I look at it, I'm kind of quite hopeful that this does a number of things. I hope it prolongs Ben Stokes' England career because I think they're like Batman and Robin. So I can see them wanting to do that together. I think it'll probably also extend the life of someone like Joe Root, who seems to be really enjoying playing in this environment as well. The question I want to ask though is like from a New Zealand perspective, what does that make you feel? Really proud? Does it make you feel pissed off that he's not your coach? Like what how does that sort of rank for you guys as Kiwis?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really, to be honest, I don't really have any strong feelings. I'm happy for him. I said to you, I was more surprised that he wanted to get on that treadmill for that long. That was the biggest thing for me. I mean, I know that, I'm sure there's loads of people that think it'd be great to, I'm sure Gary Stead's going to get to the end of his cycle, and there's obviously lots of people at the moment thinking that it's time for a bit of a change. A lot of the other coaching staff in New Zealand have changed. The bowling coaches, Jacob Oram now. We've had changes in the selectors. We've obviously had change of captain. So, some of the players are starting to come in. I'm sure loads of people were going, okay, well, hopefully Brendon, maybe Brendon will finish with England and he'll come back home and do the New Zealand stuff. And this obviously means that that's not going to happen. But I wasn't, I don't know, that there's been no sort of emotional outpouring. It's more just been for me, I'm quite surprised that he wants to, because being a full-time coach, we've talked, especially for England, we talked, I think last time we were all together about how kind of ridiculous it is that everyone talks about the schedules at the moment, but England's playing a test series and then sometimes they're playing a one-day series the next day. So I don't even know how logistically they're going to manage all of that stuff.
That's quieting down a little bit. So I think I'm not saying it's not going to be sometimes needing to be in two places at once, but I think they've said that his assistant coaches will step in. Yeah. I think what probably also goes in his favour is he doesn't start the white ball gig until January. Obviously, we're touring here at the end of the year. And I think we tour here again for one day as next year as well.
Sounds about right.
So there's two tours of New Zealand. There's an Ashes in Australia where at least he's on a similar time zone, I guess. So I think there's some things that go in his favour. And I think there's also, when I looked at the schedule really briefly, and it does get filled up, of course, but it looks as if there's some pretty decent, chunky enough breaks in there where he's got 6 to 8 weeks where he can come and have a couple of games of club rugby in Dunedin or because he does, doesn't he? That's what he does. Look after his horses and
and he would have negotiated, like you said, he would have negotiated a few things where he can skip some tours, right?
Yeah, he's probably got a custom fitting from Titleist for some new clubs and all kinds of stuff.
Just to answer your question around how I felt when he was, I didn't have any of those pangs of jealousy. It's great seeing two great New Zealanders at the helm of the English cricket team. And my first thought, like Stu, was why would he want to do this? I think that when he took the job, it was under the sort of proviso that he was doing just the Red Bull stuff, and that seems to have changed. But I personally like it. I'll come to you, Baldy, the sort of one voice approach. I actually have always liked that in terms of a cricket team. England play their cricket at test level like they're a white ball side. It's not that much of a change. There will be obviously tactical changes, but the philosophy is the same. What do you make of that?
So they're going to try and score 700 in a one day or something.
They could do it.
They might as well. I mean, you're absolutely right. The messaging doesn't change, which I think is a huge thing from a consistency perspective for England, because what I expect to happen is that whoever the assistant coaches are, I think Wikipedia are telling me that it's Paul Collingwood, Freddie Flintoff, Jimmy Anderson, Trescothick, Jeetan Patel. They will adopt a lot of functional roles in terms of taking that white ball side on tours where McCullum can't be there, or McCullum is at home for a well-earned break or whatever. So as long as those messages are consistent, and I can't see why they wouldn't be, England are well poised to continue to be at the top end of white ball cricket against India and those other big nations for years to come. I think, regardless of whatever the personnel changes might be with Butler retires or what have you. I think you're right, Raj. The consistency of messaging and the simplicity of the environment that Brendon McCullum creates, the clarity of mind that his players have in the red ball stuff, if they can continue to do that in the white ball environment, and all the rest of stuff is just matchups.
I think that out of everything, the number one thing I take from this is he must be having a great time.
Enjoying it.
He must really be enjoying working with this side to go, okay, like all of the other things, that interests that he has in his life, and obviously his family and stuff, and base has been here in New Zealand. So to actually, take up an extra couple of years, take on these extra responsibilities, he must be loving it.
Yeah. It appears as if they all are, unless they are, all contractually obliged to go out and trot this out, which they're not. That every single player seems to be coming up with the same rhetoric. Even someone like James Anderson, who, to be honest, could have gone off in a right sulk, couldn't he? But he stayed with the team, and he talks positively about it. And I think the big thing with Anderson is he talks honestly about it. He says, "Do you know what? I wasn't ready to leave, but this is the next best thing now for me to stick around and be able to impart some of that wisdom on some of these guys coming through." And he's going to need to do that. And he's going to need to do that because it's been announced today Mark Wood has got an injury, stress fracture.
All year,
stress fracture of the elbow. We've got a guy, Josh Hull, coming in on debut, mentioned in the intro. I think 2 first-class wickets or something, about a million. Got a high ceiling apparently, and he's 6'7", so I understand where that's coming from. And I'm not the first one. I'm not the first one to have mentioned that, I'm sure. But they're going to need to, find players that are, are suitable for this environment, and particularly for the tour of Baldy's home country in a couple of years.
Just on Josh Hull, it's interesting because I don't think that you can take county championship stats into the international arena. I mean, if you did, you'd have a whole heap of little sort of
Darren Stevens.
Darren Stevens would have 400 Test wickets by now.
So, we've just seen this with Shoaib Bashir, haven't we?
But do you think that this is completely disregarding it?
Well, look, from a stats perspective, the thing that, I guess the thing that's really pissed me off about this rhetoric and particularly the way that it's been questioned in the press is they're saying he's going into this with no confidence and no pedigree. He played an England Lions game against Sri Lanka and took 5 for.
Yeah.
So he's actually just had recent success against the team that he's going to make his Test debut against. If that had been Australia and that had been the President's game or one of the warm-up games or whatever it's called, they'd be like, good plan. He's hit someone in the head in that game, and now he can go and hit them in the head in a real game. So I don't have a massive issue. Clearly, they're not looking at statistics from the county championship, and nor should they really, because there isn't anybody that fulfills that role in county championship cricket. They're looking at someone that bowls quick and that's 6'7". They can pick a bunch of 5'10" right arm seamers that bowl 75 to 80 miles an hour. They've said, we think that this kid, okay, he might not always bowl at 85 or 87. He might struggle a little bit with rhythm, but he's going to come from over the top of a sight screen in the dark at the Oval and
with a pink ball.
With a pink ball. So look, I think that they've done their due diligence. They like something about him. Why not give him the opportunity? They've done it with a Zach Crawley. They've done it with a Ben Duckett. They've done it with a Shoaib Bashir. Mm-hmm. They've done it with a Will Jacks in Pakistan last year. They've done it with a Tom Hartley in India. They've picked some horses for courses, and most of them have run pretty good races on those courses. So I think, full confidence in their decision-making process.
Do you want to touch on a little bit on Atkinson before we move on from England? Because, I mean, you're talking about, you just said, England's they're going to need Jimmy Anderson's advice. I mean, Atkinson is certainly, I think, the star of the summer from this little patch, and particularly the bowling side of things. He's been the one that's been super consistent in pretty much every single test, and obviously now has a Test 100 to his name.
Yeah, I feel as if I'm dominating the running a little bit, but all I'll say is he looked like a proper batter for that 100. And Jesus, I'd want to be the sign writer at Lords if I'm getting a per letter, because Atkinson's a pretty decent length surname, isn't it? And he's on 3 honours boards. He's got a 10 for, 5 for, and now 100 at the home of cricket. So,
and another 5.
And another 5 for. So he's had a really, really good summer. Again, I think there's an element of, we've seen his speed just drop a little bit. They dropped a little bit in the last test match. I think obviously he's playing on his home ground at the Oval for this game, so you'd expect he's going to be up for that. But I think it's really, really important that we've seen someone like an Ollie Robinson come and burst onto the scene. His stats, by the way, 70-odd wickets at 22, Ollie Robinson, and he'd probably never play again. So I really want to see that, them look after Atkinson, because they're going to need him to be at that 80, 85 to 88. They can't afford to have him down at 81, 82, particularly for an Ashes tour.
Yeah, they're going to need to get the best out of him, because he's going to need to be the leader of the attack when they go to Australia in 18 months' time. If they're going to pick guys like Stone and Wood and Hull, etc., that are going to be impact players, you can't do what England tried to do with Jofra Archer, which is, I think your analogy, Raj, is treat the Ferrari like a tractor. If you're going to buy a Lamborghini, you have, it's a race car.
Lamborghinis make tractors.
They do, which is where I was going to go with my analogy. But thanks for ruining that.
Sorry,
that's okay.
We'll just edit this bit out. Go on, go back.
No, that's fine. No, it's fine. It's ruined now. No, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's ruined. You've ruined all my whole point. But they're going to have to look after him. You're absolutely right, because he can be effective if he's the mainstay, and England produce impact bowlers around him, and then they can turn to a guy like Bashir who can, be impactful in his own little special way.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you a question about the English cricket team?
Sure.
Seems like a serious one.
Well, the question is, I think that there's a bit of a false sense of security around they're playing Sri Lanka. I think that Ben Stokes is absolutely key to the English side. I don't think that the batting lineup that they have at the moment with Wokes, obviously Wokes may not go to Australia or whatever, but Wokes at 7 and Atkinson at 8, that is a very, very long tail. I feel like if they take that overseas, specifically to the Ashes, that's a real problem. You need Stokes there at 5, sort of pushing everybody down, or wherever he's going to bat, pushing everybody down to elongate that batting lineup.
Agree. Yeah, he has to come back in, and he's the all-rounder. And there's an argument for me whether he bat 6 or 5 or 6 or 7, because I think Jamie Smith could probably bat 5 or 6. Harry Brook can clearly, probably bat 4 or 5. But yeah, absolutely. We look a better balanced team. What we're doing in this really is saying, we're pretty comfortable that we'll get enough out of Atkinson and Wokes, not to replace Stokes, but to give us enough runs, and it's worked so far. But yeah, absolutely, Stokes needs to come back in to balance that side. But I think really importantly, Jamie Smith, I think, is a serious cricketer.
Does look good, isn't he?
A serious cricketer, and I think him coming in at 6 or 7 is a lot different to folks coming in at 7.
Yeah,
I think that's a really, really, really big difference.
Yep, I completely agree. I don't want to talk him up and for you to then just go, you're just trying to put the moz on him. But he's actually the kind of guy that if he came to Australia, you could see him scoring runs, a bit like Matt Pryor. when Pryor came to Australia, you could see he was a thorn in that Australian side at 6 or 7 or wherever. And I think Jamie Smith is going to be the same. It won't be a case of getting through the top 6 and all of a sudden now you're into the guys who are a little bit more defensive, aren't going to hurt you with their scoring rate. Jamie Smith is dead set going to hurt you if you're anywhere off your game to him. So, Australia are going to have to be good to counter that.
And they do need someone like an Atkinson to turn themselves into a genuine number 8, because otherwise, with the likes of Bashir, with the likes of Hull, Stone, Archer, they are all tail enders. So that they absolutely need a little bit of engine room, I think, there. But I think that if they've got Stokes and Smith, they've got the top of that engine room sorted out. Let's move on. Should we talk a little bit of New Zealand? So we've got, I think, did I read 30 days out of 60 playing Test match cricket over the course of the next 2 months?
Yes,
or so.
30 over the next 2 months. Well,
you've counted 5 days there as well.
Yeah, I think that's the key. But yes,
the grounds will be open. They've had to get the catering in for those 30 days.
Yeah, 6 tests in the subcontinent. I saw, Ajaz was interviewed about that and how excited he is. Obviously, a huge opportunity for him to.
You think he's excited about playing
to actually play 6 games? 6 games in a row. Which do
you think they have to introduce him at the team meeting? Hi, I'm Ajaz.
Remember, the last time I was here, I took all the wickets.
Yeah. No, so, it's exciting. I mean, I'm a little bit nervous about it because I think it's going to be hard work, and I think it's going to be it's going to be quite interesting, basically, about what they do. We've picked, certainly in the squad, they picked the squad for Afghanistan and for Sri Lanka, and it's packed to the brim with, spin bowling all-rounders. We've got, if we're going to count Rachin, we've got Glenn Phillips, we've got Michael Bracewell, we've got Mitchell Santner. And there's a world if some of these pitches are super, spin-friendly, where quite a lot of those guys play. And, plus Ajaz and maybe, one or two, one seamer, 2 seamers that, they've also talked about. Tim Southey has said, if conditions are really not suited to me, then I won't play, and and other bowlers will play. So
who would skipper then?
Probably Latham, I would say. Yeah, I mean, he's been the one that's stepped in when Kane wasn't. Yeah. When Kane was unavailable in different times. But I actually think Southey, look, he didn't bowl. He's admitted himself that he wasn't at his best at the end of New Zealand's summer. Again, I'm super interested to see how he bounces back, because he's had a bit of T20 cricket since then and actually looked quite good in the parts that I've seen and some franchise stuff, and obviously bowled all right at the T20 World Cup. So. It's a big patch of games for him. You've got guys like Ben Sears, who, and Will O'Rourke, who are over there, who are the kind of impact players that you guys were talking about for England, the sort of guys that can come in and maybe run in and, over in the subcontinent, you've got a limited opportunity as a seamer sometimes to run in and make the most. Ben Sears was talking about attacking the stumps, and, his role is going to be very different than it might have been at home when he was playing, when he made his test debut in the game that we were in Christchurch at Hagley against Australia. So, but fascinating, couple of months coming up. I mean, how are you feeling, Raj, about this first game against Afghanistan and then kind of 2 in Sri Lanka? Are you expecting us to win all 3 of these games?
The Afghanistan games in India. It's in India.
Yeah. Starts on Monday. Very soon. Exciting. It's Sky Sport, 4:00 start. It's sort of perfect for us over here in New Zealand.
I'm always nervous when we go to that part of the world, being so different from our conditions. What makes me more nervous is the noises that are coming out of the camp in terms of, Tim Southey may not play, Tom Latham's going to captain. We don't know what the makeup is going to be of the side. I'm sure internally they have a bit more of an idea of what is going to happen, but that's those sort of noises make me nervous based on other tours we've had, which I keep banging on again about. What was it, 2018 in Sri Lanka last time?
Yes.
So it makes me nervous having those selection questions. I mean, even Matt Henry versus Tim Southey, that's actually a big decision, because you've got your captain versus probably the seamer who's in a bit more form at the moment, if you're only going to choose one. And then also, we're not used to playing with a full-time seamer who will bowl 45 overs from one end on a day. Sorry, a full-time spinner who will bowl 45 overs from one end for a full day. So that changes how our side's balanced. And when you look at people like Glenn Phillips, who I think should be a permanent fixture in the team no matter what the conditions are, but how do you fit them in with the likes of, Daryl Mitchell, Rachin Ravindra? Bracewell is clearly up there in terms of his, where his place in the team was prior to his injury.
I reckon he might be he might be down the pecking order now. We'll see, but yeah.
Well, I mean, what would you guys do? I think the top 4 for New Zealand is, well, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the top 4 isn't set in stone, but the top 4 feels set in stone to me. I think 10 and 11 are pretty close to decided. Ajaz will bat 11, and it'll be Asima that'll be at 10. But 5,
I think they'll play 2 seamers.
I've picked 2 seamers.
I think they'll play 2
so
seamers.
you've got 2 seamers. So 9, 10, 11.
I mean, I obviously have no idea about this pitch.
Is Daryl Mitchell an option for 5 overs?
Maybe.
What I'm saying is, and picking only one seamer.
In the way, you mean it's sort of in a way Colin de Gronholm would open the bowling sometimes in those conditions?
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe if they really want to. But I mean, I don't know. Like, again, we're sort of talking like it's going to be super, super spin friendly. I mean, we've just seen, I know Pakistan is different, but we've obviously just seen Pakistan and Bangladesh play a test series where, seam was really the Bangladesh
winner of the day.
have made a huge impact. So I do think we'll play 2 seamers at least to start with. But who those 2 seamers are, it will be the question. And yeah, I think really if we're in a situation where we're not really trusting 2 seamers to play, we'll just start with Ajaz, or we'll start with Santner, or because Santner bowls with the new ball in white ball cricket sometimes. So yeah, I think that's what they would do.
Yeah. Okay, so 5, 6, 7, 8. Where do you think you should be leaning?
So I think the top 6 is fairly set. With our
walk us through.
Please feel free to disagree with me. Latham, Conway, Williamson, top 3. Mitchell, Ravindra, whichever order you want to do them in, and Blundell at 6 as keeper. So, and then we'll jump down to 9, 10, 11, pace bowler, Ajaz. And then 7 and 8. That's where it comes down to which spinner you play, what matchups you want to play. If you want to play the left arm spin of Santner, but remembering you have Ajaz and Ravindra in the side to also bowl left arm, and whether you feel like you need more batsmen like Bracewell and Phillips are decent batsmen as well.
Listing it out like that, I actually think I'd be surprised if it's not Phillips, Santner, Southey, Henry, Ajaz.
Yeah.
I think at least for this first test, I think that they'll go with the guys who play regularly, and they'll be looking at opportunities to where can we bring in Sears or O'Rourke or someone like that. And actually, Bracewell, yes, he was our number 1. He made his way to be the number 1 kind of spin bowling all rounder, but it's been a while since then. He sort of had that injury, and that really set him back. And in that time, Rachin Ravindra emerged. And Glenn Phillips, his spin bowling continued to improve to the point where, he picked up 5 for against Australia. So as much as you might still think of him as a part-timer, I think, he again bowled really well in Bangladesh when we were over there. So, yeah, I think he's probably, again, I think he's good enough to be there as a, probably bat 6 and ahead of Blundell and play. But yeah, they can bat him at 6 or 7. It doesn't really matter.
I really like Santner in the balance of that New Zealand side, because if you have a look at where India are super successful, and I'm not comparing him directly to Akshar, but Santner can dump the ball into a good area consistently on the stumps and make batters make a decision in front of their own sticks, and Santner can challenge not outside both halves of the bat, but he can challenge both halves of the bat. He's not going to turn the ball a long way, but he's going to make players make decisions in front of their own stumps. I think he can be quite successful if he's going to be that holding bowler that makes you make a decision. Whereas you've got guys at the other end. Phillips turns the ball quite a long way he's better than a part-timer now, but he turns the ball reasonably appreciably. Ajaz is the same, so different styles of bowler. I like Santner as your third spinner ahead of a guy like Bracewell, who is going to be good, but I think Santner gives you that a little bit of point of difference, and he can bat. Not that Bracewell can't bat, but Santner I think is also a good bat.
What I'd like to see Santner do is some of that Akshar stuff, because I think what Akshar does really well is the quicker when he bowls quicker on those conditions,
swings the ball.
Yeah, he can swing it, but also it's the speed and and it skids through, and it means that people are playing it for the skid, and as soon as he turns it, whereas Santner has a bit of that, but I think what Santner's developed over the last couple of years, I think, one, he's been able to turn the ball more, but also he's developed the flight, which has been loved. Like, I love seeing that, but I think in some ways, sometimes in India, and certainly in India, when Akshar's been at his best, it's been the quick ones that have been the most lethal in various conditions.
Yeah. The only thing I'll just probably add and maybe ask is, when you toured last time on the subcontinent was Bangladesh, and Glenn Phillips was really the batter that impressed with his ability on the subcontinent then.
Those pitches were horrendous.
And they were absolute, yeah. So those were minefields, right?
Yeah.
So my only kind of question mark is, do you potentially see a scenario where he actually bats higher up the order than, say, Ravindra, and Ravindra's the guy that might bat 6 or 7. But I think in terms of the personnel, that would, I would agree that would be the way that you would go. And I know Ravindra's been up at 4 or 5, I think. And clearly, that's where you probably see him longer term. I don't know.
Johnson to open.
Well, I have a problem. I think that he should be opening, and Conway should be batting at 4.
Okay.
Conway started opening the batting because Ross Taylor was in the number 4 position. And that was the only spot in the side. I think, we should have our engine room with Williamson and Conway.
Yeah, I agree.
3 and 4.
Yeah, Williamson, Conway, and then Daryl Mitchell at 5. Good.
And Ravindra can open
100%.
and bowl a few overs.
Yep, 100%.
For this test, I'm like this Afghanistan one. I'm quite interested to see what Afghanistan are going to put out there as well. I mean, they it's you sort of their tests are so sporadic that you look through their lineups and you sort of don't know who's going to be playing. I mean, they've picked their at the time I made my notes, they'd picked their 20-man squad. I don't know if they've now cut it down to 16, but obviously Rashid Khan does not feature. So quite a lot of the names that we've become familiar with in white ball cricket aren't there. So, there's still plenty of names there now that we recognise that we wouldn't have 5 years ago. They're an emerging side. We saw how good they've been in white ball cricket over the last 12 months, in particular in both T20 World Cup and ODI World Cup. But then you look back through their test results, and it's loss after loss after loss. And I say that, but it probably is just 3 losses because they just don't play that much test cricket. So yeah, I'm fascinated to see kind of what they put out there. Omatsai was certainly in the 20-man squad. He's still in the 16. So yeah, look, he's a quality cricketer, and
I think Afghanistan would not be poorly placed if they treated their batting innings like a 60-over game, and we're going to take as many runs out of 60 overs as we possibly can, and then back their bowling attack, which has been good over the last wee while. And, even without Rashid Khan, they're still going to have a really good spin attack to take into that game against New Zealand and back themselves to bowl New Zealand out. And just go, look, okay, let's make it a two ODI games, and we back ourselves to beat you in at least one of them.
Yeah.
Awesome. I know, Border, you're keen to get on to a couple of things. So you want to talk, I know, about Australia, and that's fine. I've seen you queuing up pages and pages of Australian meaningless one-day scorecards.
Thank you. Last New Zealand thing then, before we go, just to... They have replaced international cricket, because they have replaced the 2 contracts. When we did talk about Fennell and Devon Conway, that contract situation, they have now sort of upgraded Nathan Smith and Josh Clarkson to contracts. The Josh Clarkson, we obviously saw played some T20 and ODI cricket last year for New Zealand. Nathan Smith is the one that probably lots of people have been calling for, been super strong performer in the domestic cricket here for New Zealand. Just went over and played some county cricket, did really well over there. I think Warwickshire, maybe. I could be wrong. But, played over there.
No more than I do.
And also performed well for them. So I think probably that's the one that I'm most interested in, because I think that signals, okay, like we are taking you seriously as a player that we think can play some international cricket over the next 12 months, perhaps. So, yeah, we don't exactly have a huge amount of test cricket here over in New Zealand than the New Zealand summer. And obviously the crop of bowlers, if it's Henry, Sears, O'Rourke, and Southey, that we've just named, those 4 are probably going to be front runners to play in an England series.
Let's get through these 47 test matches in the subcontinent firstly.
Exactly. So, yeah, but it's interesting to see Nathan Smith's name make that, and well deserved for all his domestic form.
Right. Baldy, let's finish with Australia.
Okay, cool. How long have we got? Not very long. We want to wrap it up in under an hour, right?
30 seconds.
Okay. The new era of Australia one-day cricket and T20 cricket begins against Scotland this week. And, of course, I mean the new era because there's no more David Warner. Even if he really, really wants to come out of retirement, they're not going to let him, which is fine. So the Jake Fraser-McGurk era has begun a little bit with a bit of, with a first over duck. But he's in good company because Travis Head in the second game got a first ball duck. So the Australian opening partnership isn't off to a brilliant start, despite the fact that we're scoring lots of runs against Scotland. Travis Head, 80 off 25, and 78 of those 80 were in boundaries. So that's
He scored 80 runs at 320.
off 25 balls. Unbelievable.
Still playing for the Sunrisers.
Yeah, Mitchell Marsh, 39 off 12. Josh Inglis, 27 in the first game, and then the fastest T20 100 ever for Australia off 43 balls, I think, in the second game. And then Marcus Stoinis doing good things with the ball. So the new era of Australian white ball cricket without our man David Warner is going very, very well. That's it. That's all I've got to really say. It's very, very comprehensive wins against Scotland and all things looking like they're going well for Australia, including some new bowlers getting a run. Riley Meredith's back, which is good to see. He's been injured for a long time.
Stoinis taking a forfer.
I'm telling you, he's a good bowler for Australia. He's underrated as a bowler. Overrated as a batter, probably. But.
And presumably these guys are staying in the United Kingdom for this 5-test series. They don't come home first.
I think they'll move some people around because the big three bowlers are being rested from this. Right. And then Hazelwood comes in for some stuff and... Well, I don't know. Cummins probably hasn't got back out of bed yet, but we'll see what happens when we get to England.
Maybe a few of them will stick around for an oat milk latte and a bit of golf.
Yep. Well, Zampa's there, I think. Yeah, so making people coffee, so everyone's well. Oh, there he is, Zampa. Flat white.
Since you haven't taken up the 5 minutes, I do think we should probably, given I'm the one who criticises, who has. Criticised Bangladesh a fair amount. I think we should give them a shout out and say, their 2-test win against Pakistan in Pakistan, huge result for them. And I really enjoyed actually seeing some of those young seamers come through. Naheed looks a real talent, Hassan. So yeah, very, very, very good performance from them to win that test series.
Well, that was
congratulations.
That was their debut win. They'd never beaten Pakistan before in a test match. So to beat them and then beat them again 2-0. Fantastic for a Bangladesh side that were pilloried on this podcast. So we do need to give credit when it's really due. Yeah, absolutely.
It bodes well for your English to go over to Pakistan again. That Pakistan side. I mean, we've talked about it plenty of times. What a shambles Pakistan are at times, and even Shan Masood coming out, saying that they've now got this one-day cup that they're about to play for a whole bunch of time, and
we're going over there and we don't even know where we're playing at the moment. They've not announced the grounds,
and those guys, those Pakistan players, are not going to play any red ball cricket between now and then. They're going to go and play a bunch of white ball cricket, so it's really difficult to judge their form.
Like studying science in preparation for a maths exam.
I read that.
Shan Masood said. I like that.
Well, England will be playing with a white ball. It'll just be with little dimples on, and you'll have 14 clubs in your bag.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, look, guys, pleasure to be in the same room rambling about cricket again. I'm sure we'll be back for some more ramblings. We've got test matches, obviously, that will finish this week in England and in India, but New Zealand, Afghanistan, which we'll cover on the next episode of the Top Order podcast. But for now, it is good night and God bless from us all here. Quick shout out and ask for listeners, if anyone can explain to me why the ICC TV website shows the full game but doesn't then put together a highlights package. Please let us know in the comments down below, or email us at toporderpodcast@gmail.com and carbon copy the ICC if you can as well. That'd be fantastic. But for now, it is good night. A good bless from us all here. Baldy looking awkwardly at the camera, as am I as well. We'll see you next week on the Top Order podcast. See you later.